Hello, everyone. My name is Jamie Hinkle, and I'm the Learning and Inclusion Manager at PFLAG National. My pronouns are she and her. And thank you all so much for joining us today for something to talk about live. As always, I'm going to introduce my friend, my colleague, my partner in crime, Jean Marie Nevada, who's going to lead our conversation today.
Hey, Hinkle, how's it going?
It's going good. You know, I know that this is going to surprise you, but it's raining in Portland right now.
I refuse to believe it. And it's dry in the desert here in Palm Springs.
That's crazy.
I know.
That's insane.
The shock all over the place. Well, we will see you a little bit later.
That's right.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to Something to Talk About. Once again, my name is Jean Marie Nevada, and I'm the Director of Learning and Inclusion at PFLAG National. And every week we get together to talk about a current events article. And this week, because it is Trans Awareness Week, we are talking about the Transgender Day of Remembrance, which is coming up tomorrow, and just in general, what we are seeing when it comes to violence against the trans community. So this week, if you want to get today's article, it is located where it always is, which is straightforequality.org/discussion series. And we're using an article that was published in Forbes, written by Jamie Wareham, and it was about the violence against people who are trans. And to have today's conversation, I have two of my family with me today. So I want to introduce Diego Sanchez, who is PFLAG's Director of Policy. Hola. And I want to introduce Stephanie Battaglino from PFLAG National's board and soon to be published author also.
Oh, shucks.
Welcome. Welcome, my friends. And I'm so grateful that you are both here to have this conversation with us. And it's a really difficult conversation, frankly, but I feel like it's one that we have to have because so many people still don't understand what's going on. And so I'm really grateful for you for coming on today. So the article talks about the epidemic of violence against people who are trans and non-binary. And it gives some details, like so far this year, we know about 350 people who have been murdered because they are trans identified. One of the statistics in the article that really got to me was that a fifth of those individuals were actually killed while they were in their own homes. Mm-hmm. And that really spoke to me about there is in many cases no safe spaces, and that there were really big increases here in the US. I mean, the UK has quadrupled over the last 4 years. So I want to get this conversation started, which was for both of you, and maybe we can start with Diego and then go to Stephanie. What jumped out to you in this article? Was there anything that shocked you? Was there anything that you thought it's about time we're talking about it? So what showed up for you? And Diego, maybe you can start.
Sure. Thanks, Jean Marie. There were three things that shocked me. Number one, that they said globally 79% of those who are murdered are trans women. It's much higher stateside and in Puerto Rico and in Latin America. So that number I felt was low. The second thing that shocked me was the title is pretty much a trigger warning, but the article itself did not make strong enough the point that when people kill my people, they don't just shoot us once or stab us once. They do terrible, terrible things. They make sure the job is done. And I feel like while the headline addressed that, they didn't really take on that point to make it to the public. The third thing that shocked me was that they seemed to think that the first time that trans murders were documented and being counted was in 2008. Rita Hester was a friend of mine, and in 98, when she was murdered, we started collecting data nationally then and went back 10 years before that. So the people who, when Gwen Smith started doing the Remembering Our Dead stuff, we went back and we did global. So 2008 is much later than data started being collected.
Right. Mm-hmm. And I thought that some of the statistics in there were interesting, but it also sort of interested me in the way it did seem kind of new. And we all know that this is not a new conversation. So Stephanie, what showed up for you?
Well, just to tag on to what Diego just said, because it's true. I think I went to my first TDOR in like 2004, 2003. So it's like that jumped out at me too. It's like, well, no, wait a minute. This isn't a phenomenon that just happened in the aughts. This has been going on for a very long time. What jumped out at me, first of all, is the sheer numbers. I mean, we're talking about numbers that are so much higher than they were just in comparison to last year. And to Diego's point as well, what has always gotten me about all of this is the extreme violence that mostly trans women of color have had to endure in these situations. We had a situation not far from here in, I believe it was like in Brawley, California, or someplace close to that, in this desert south of here, where a trans woman was killed, and then they left her on a couch and they put the couch on fire. I mean, what is that? I mean, that's a level of hate that is exponentially higher than I have ever seen in my life. And that's what gets me so angry and gets me so frustrated, that these cries out that come out from our community have still gone unanswered. Because the other thing that got me is, you know, the trans community, we face this tsunami of societal things that are happening. It's not just these senseless and horrific murders. We're dealing with administrations and governments, Poland and Hungary in Europe, obviously here in the outgoing administration, where they're taking active steps to erase our community and not have access to appropriate health care, for example. And we know with COVID that the trans community is exposed. So many elements of our community are exposed. So it's all of that coming together that only for me is making this a much larger and a conversation that we need to have if we really want to affect change, so that we don't have to be doing these things ever again. You know, we'll always celebrate our dead, but let's not have to celebrate any new dead.
Thank you. I want to ask you both a question. I always do this, and someday somebody's going to get mad at me for it, that I did not plan on asking, which is, because both of you kind of touched on something that just made my brain light up a little bit, which was, for many people, this is kind of a new conversation. There are a lot of people reading articles like this and very much thinking that a lot of this started relatively recently. What do you think has caused people to pay more attention now? Why do you think this is so much more in the mainstream conversation? In fact, I would even point out that if you go on Google this week, at the bottom of the page, it actually notes that this is Trans Awareness Week. So there's so much more awareness. Diego, do you have any ideas around why you think this has become a much more visible issue? I mean, you've been at this a long time, so you've got the timeline.
That's true. Thank you, Jean Marie. Yeah, I think that there's more awareness because there are a lot more laws and people. There have been avenues for people to disclose safely or not. And then you have, the celebrity side of trans visibility that has brought awareness. Some people we like, some, less, but they're all very visible. And that means that the world and the country are able to see people who are trans. We also have to remember that while it's all very fancy, a lot of this goes back to Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act of 2010. And even though that start was passed then under the past administration, we also only started counting gender identity deaths in that FBI report in 2013. Yeah. So that's the thing. It's incremental, it's visible, and therefore, as we add language, the education that you do, Jean Marie, in corporations and businesses and communities, and that you do as well, Stephanie, that is also elevating the knowledge that people have and the comfort with which they can ask questions or say something.
And I think that, thank you. And I think that that's so important. I think it also, to me, when I look at statistics about the number of, for example, Americans who say, I know someone who's trans identified, it's at about 37% right now. And I think, wow, if we'd asked that 10 years ago, that number wouldn't have looked like that. And I think it speaks so much to the number of trans people who are open and disclosing and making these connections and frankly, forcing a lot of us to understand what it means to show up as allies. I want to ask Stephanie, I want to go into the second question because I want to ask you about this one, because you mentioned Trans Day of Remembrance and going to events, that you've been going to them for a very long time. Mm-hmm. So a lot of them are going virtual this year, obviously, because we can't be together because of COVID. So what kind of impact do you think that that's going to have? And do you personally have any plans to attend any virtual events?
Well, just as it happens, I will be participating in PFLAG's TDOR event tomorrow afternoon. Well, tomorrow evening in the East, in the afternoon in the West. But here's the thing. I think since they're all having to go virtual because of COVID, my hope is that more people will participate. That, you know, the platform is open now for people to just go in front of their computer screen and to pay their respects. So, so that's really what I'm hoping should happen. And I would say to people, tell your friends, tell people. I had just written a piece and posted it in LinkedIn a couple of days ago. It's like, you know, if you consider yourself an ally of the trans community and you haven't been to a TDOR event, then you should be. You should be. You know, and don't consider it as like another stamp in your ally passport. Do it because you want to understand more about the history of our community and what so many elements of the community are facing every single day. And I think, you know, so that, because at the end of the day, we want you to join with us and lift these people up and lift your voices up so that we can create the change that we seek.
Yeah. And Diego, could you talk a little bit about what you think on that? Because I mean, you two have been attending these events a long time, and you're one of the organizers for PFLAG's event tomorrow.
Looking very much forward to tomorrow night. Hope everybody, and afternoon, hope everybody joins us. Yeah, I mean, you know, when Rita Hester died in '98, we held two vigils in Boston, one in Austin in her hometown and one in Boston. And in '99, when Gwen Smith in San Francisco said, enough, we need to make this national, she did that. While we're moving into these virtual events, I do know that we're going to miss the community closeness and dealing with the therapists, the behavioral health specialists that are there for us after every one of these. And if I want to make light of it, I can say I won't have candle wax burns after my vigil tomorrow night.
Right.
But I do think that we'll, you know, there are a lot of people who are not safe to go to these events. Having them virtual, they can turn off their not have their image there, be blind to the external world and be able to participate.
Yeah, you know, and I hadn't actually thought about the confidentiality piece, but I think that that's a really important piece because we saw that phenomenon during Pride Month, where we saw people attending their first Pride events in places where, in many cases, we knew it was completely unsafe for them to even show up at a Pride event, never mind actually be visible at that event. So I think that's really fascinating. And somebody in our comments, I'm sort of trying to read as I go along, and people are talking about what they're attending. I know that I've got myself scheduled to attend 2 of them tomorrow, and it's this virtual nature that allows us to do it. And I'm kind of excited that I get to go at one in my home state and one in my state where I live. So both of you have talked about allies, and PFLAG is, if nothing else, the biggest ally organization that we've got out there. I want to talk about what allies should be doing, because so many people, like we said, can now say, I have a friend who is trans, I know someone who's trans, I have a colleague who's non-binary. And one of the questions that we get most of all at PFLAG is, what should I do now? So how do I demonstrate support? So I want to ask you both this question. I would like to know a thing, or maybe a couple of things, that you think allies should start doing and maybe make it as part of their commitment this week to being better allies. And I would also like to know a couple of things that allies maybe should stop doing, because I think that there's a lot of good intentions sometimes in the ally space that doesn't quite play out the way it was intended to. So, Steph, maybe I can go with you first on this one.
Here's short answer. 1, what should you be doing? Speaking up. 2, what shouldn't you be doing? Staying silent. That's the easy part. But the way I like to frame it, and I do this a lot when I work with companies and whatnot, is think of it this way. You're going to have, as an individual, because we've all been there at one point in our lives where it's like, so what can I do? How do I make a difference? What's the first step? What I often say is the people that you have the most influence over are those individuals that are in your circle, that family circle, that social circle that's closest to you. And think of it this way. Think of it as like raindrops hitting a very still lake. You create a ripple by speaking up and speaking out to this circle. And then they tell two friends, and they tell two friends, and they tell two friends. And suddenly all these raindrops are dropping and all these ripples are starting to overlap. And that's how movements are created. And that's how we make a difference. And that's how we move the needle in a positive direction. So that's what I would say. You know, you don't have to get out there, you know, with a cowbell at the town square and make some big public pronouncement. If you want to do that, knock yourself out. But what I'm saying is, closest to home is where we can make the biggest difference. And then it truly emanates from there. And close to home might be your family unit. It also might be where you work and your colleagues that are closest to you. So it not only applies to your personal life, but it also applies to your business life as well.
Yeah, and I like the point that you're making about making sure that you're having those conversations everywhere. I know that when we're teaching, one of the questions that we get most of all is, when should I talk about this with my kids? And we don't even ask how old the kids are. Our answer generally is now. Now's your opportunity, because I'm going to bet that your kids are probably onto this already. So, Diego, what are your allies start and stop things? I like your stuff. You're like, stop being quiet, start talking.
You'll remember Steph's better than mine. I want to speak to the families and the friends who really want to be supportive. I think start celebrating people along their journeys and don't try to create where their way stations are. People transitioning is not an overnight thing. It's usually a lifetime thing. So don't think that like, okay, you've done this, now you're done. Celebrate people at every phase of their life and let them know that you do that. The other thing that I think people should start doing is recognize that data drives policy. And that means that we need states and municipalities to participate in the FBI hate crimes data reporting, and that it should be mandatory. We have to make sure that it's mandatory. There's no reason for the state of Alabama to have reported to the FBI that it had 0 hate crimes in 2019. When it comes to stopping, I hope that people will stop fearing to ask respectfully what they feel it's important for them to know. If you want to know, then it's valid. As long as you're respectful, then trans and non-binary people should be open to listening and answering as they can.
Wow.
Amen.
Wow.
Amen. Amen.
Amen to all of that. And I think the asking questions is a really tough one for allies sometimes. Again, because I teach and because I am, or at least I aspire to be an ally, I think sometimes people, some days I get it better than others. But I think sometimes people feel comfortable asking, us questions. And I always say to people, you should ask your trans friends and family, but the way that you ask that question is everything is in that. So do either one of you have any advice on how to ask questions if you've got personal questions? I certainly have how I do it, but I would love to hear from both of you if you have any guidance.
Wow. What I was thinking of when you were just saying what you were saying, Jean Marie, is, it's about first being open enough to lean in, if you will, to that difficult conversation, because I think, part of it, it's like kind of that pre-conversation preparation in your head. I mean, because you go like, oh my God, this is going to be really hard. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. It's like, hold on a minute, step back for just a second. And think about the relationship that you already have with this individual. Think about the space that you both occupy. And then you're going to realize, more than likely, that it might be safer than you think to be able to kind of lean in and to ask that question, and I would just say that, as long as you let your personal sense of integrity and humanity and grace guide that conversation, then you're going to be fine. You're going to be fine. I think a lot of people, they get this paralysis because they're like, oh my God, I don't know what to say. It's like pronouns, right? I don't want to use the wrong pronoun. I don't know what to call you, so I'm not going to say anything. No, that's not the right answer. It's letting your internal moral compass guide you into that conversation. It's safe to do that. It's safe to take that jump, because that is what will guide you. That is what will tether you to doing the right thing.
Yeah.
So I'm going to take the lane of, I was born female and raised partially female and say that my angle on that is just a little different. I think that people should lean in with their own vulnerability, because if you're afraid, the best thing to do is to say so. Let the person know your intent that Steph was talking about. I'm asking you because I'm really interested in you. I care about you and I want to know. I feel a little awkward because I'm really not knowledgeable and I don't want to do anything that's disrespectful. But I think leaning in with vulnerability allows the trans or non-binary person to take up a little more space in that room, and it puts you on a really even keel.
I love that. I love that. And I think a lot of it is about that humility. And I like the fact that you both emphasized letting people know what your intent is. Because I think sometimes the question can come out a little bit aggressively, especially if people don't quite have their sea legs when it comes to the language and stuff. But I think if that context is given, I really didn't think about it that way. So thank you a lot for that. Diego, I wanted to ask you a question specifically, because we have definitely seen a lot of challenges among violence against trans women of color in particular. What are you seeing? What do you think needs to happen next? I mean, because if you look at the numbers where the violence actually happens and to whom it happens, Black transgender women, and we know that in Puerto Rico, there have been a lot of challenges, particularly this year. So what are you seeing and what do you think needs to happen next? How should this be addressed?
So I have the good grace and luck of having led the nation's first transgender healthcare program that was government funded ever. And so where I come from on this is from the public health mode, which is to say employment, healthcare, housing. That is the triad for safety. Everything that discriminates anyone from achieving any of those three, the other two fall away. So we really need to recognize that first of all, we need a federal government that will allow transgender women to be able to stay in taxpayer-funded shelters, for heaven's sake, and to do so safely. But we also need to make room for allowing people to gain skills, kind of the way trans tech does, to bring people through their own skill base and make them better professionals in the future. And we also need to make sure that we're opening our doors and asking what people need, so that we're looking at places like Bambi Salcedo's place and Casa Ruby, that we're answering the need that they will tell us if we will ask.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. And actually, we have had a lot of really good comments today, and I want to make sure that people are seeing this. So I'm going to see if Jamie wants to come back in and help share a few of those comments. And I think there were one or two questions that popped up.
Yeah, there was a question that popped up that brings us back to the beginning of the conversation. So I'm sorry to go back to the article and the really horrific violence that it outlaid. But somebody was wondering if in the work that you do or in the conversations that you're having, do you think that it would be helpful or counterproductive to discuss these murders and this violence in the terms of lynching?
Wow.
We do have an anti-lynch. I'll cover for a second, Steph.
Yeah, please do. Please do.
We actually have an anti-lynching bill. Do you know that lynching is not illegal in the United States? How about that? There is an anti-lynching bill that we will be needing to move, and maybe we'll have legislators that will let us do that. PFLAG is a supporter of that bill. And most people I tell were shocked to learn that that's true. So I think when you're looking at all types of violence where someone does something to another, yes, they are kindred.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree.
Thank you for that. And I mean, I think that it is, we gave a trigger warning for this article because it really is shocking. I think a word like lynching and knowing that it is not illegal to lynch somebody in the United States is shocking. And it's, I appreciate that. Now, Diego, this speaks a little bit to what you sort of closed out with. Somebody mentioned that there is a pretty big problem with state and local governments not only denying healthcare, but actually barring companies or unions or contracts at the state level to have any healthcare that's specific to trans issues. Do you have any recommendations for sort of pushing back against that at the state level or at the local level within companies when you see not only that these benefits aren't being provided, but they're actively being denied and barred?
Yes, and sadly, it's true everywhere right now because Section 1557 of the Affordable Care Act made it okay for health insurers not to provide health care for trans people, whether it's for a blood test, a bloody nose, or hormone transition-related care. In terms of what you can do at the local level, hang in there. We're going to get this fixed very soon. Because it is a life priority, and the administration that's coming in, this is not political, it's just factual. The administration that is coming in has already mentioned the words transgender. He has done that. And his wife mentioned gender identity when she was a keynote speaker for PFLAG's national conference in 2011. We know that we are seen, and we will be able to fix things locally and state-wise. We're going to have to probably, in this case, sadly, start at the federal level with healthcare coverage.
Now, I saw some pointing. I was like, what's going on?
Marie was silent.
I know.
Somebody else commented that they have found it to be really useful when people share stories, and that is a way to really create conversation. And they made the recommendation to follow social media profiles. And so I guess the question I have for all three of you is, if you were going to recommend, an advocate or an activist in the trans and non-binary space to follow, who would you recommend?
I would start with Janet Mock. Because she's been through it all in a way that's openly disclosed. I would also follow Laverne Cox because she's also very open and active. They're not afraid to speak, and they have followings enough to where, and they're both my friends. So in full disclosure, they're my babies. But they're good.
Yeah, and Diego, I would second that. Laverne and I go back a long time. We go back to New York City. We did a spot on TV when Chaz Bono was on Dancing with the Stars, and we were on one of those cheesy entertainment programs where we were watching, and then we were saying supportive things, and then that wound up getting broadcast. But the point,
I was on one with her as well, and it was, I can't remember the woman, but it was she ended up being on The View, and now she's gone. But it's a very loud woman.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
And oh my God, Laverne went off, and that woman called Chaz she, and so then I had to step in. It was pretty bad. But who would you follow, Steph?
Oh, geez. Well, I tend to think of people like that have been in like in the corporate space. So like Amanda Simpson comes to mind. She's such a role model for everything that she's done in her career and for our community. Because one of the biggest things that I always that I think about, and people like Lynn Conway, for example.
Yes.
My wife Mari just told me that IBM finally apologized after like however many decades,
40, 50 years,
45 years, I think it was, for firing Lynn. I mean, these are people that trailblazers. I was barely out of the activist womb, for crying out loud, when they had already made their mark. And so these are the people that I looked up to. These are the people that, Maggie Stump is another one. She's a dear friend of mine. She lives in Hawaii now. She was my role model for coming out. When she came out, she was the chief investment officer in Prudential. So these are some of the people that I've tried to emulate in my own activism.
I apologize for my abrupt departure. I have to go to the Maryland chamber.
I do need to get Diego out of here. So Diego, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, my brother.
Stephanie, thank you so much too for being with us. And when you have your book, we will make sure we talk about that. Jamie, thank you so much for hosting. I do need to get us out of this show. So I just want to remind everybody that if you are interested in participating in PFLAG's Transgender Day of Remembrance event, that is happening tomorrow. And if you go to the PFLAG website, you can get information on that. I am going to end the way we end every single week, which is reminding you to run fast, laugh hard, be kind, and to wear the mask, wear your mask. Also, please remember, next week is the holiday, so we are taking a week off from the show. So if you want to watch these episodes with your family, you can binge watch us on YouTube by visiting youtube.com/PFLAG. But please put on your masks, be safe for the holidays, and we will see you in a couple of weeks. Have a great holiday, everybody.